Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. It's an opportunity today to look at Psalm 24. I think to start out, I'll just say we had such a beautiful conversation about Psalm 23 2 weeks ago, which really spoke to the fact that when poetry, any kind of poetry, becomes something that people know by heart, when there's a song that is in common with everybody, when everybody has it memorized, that changes the ability to have a conversation about it. And it changes how we think about it and how we experience it. And so most of our Psalms, most of the Psalms, we don't know by heart. Even the Psalms that are used in full in our prayer service, like Psalm 24 is, most of us don't necessarily know the whole Psalm by heart. And so Psalm 23 really gave us an insight into the change in experience that a person can have, or that a community can have, when there is a shared text that is known by heart. Psalm 24, we also use in full in our prayer service. And I think that some people probably are very familiar with it. It is the Psalm for Sunday. So if you are in the practice of coming to morning minyan on Sunday mornings, right, you'll have encountered this psalm every week, every Sunday morning, because it is the Psalm for Sunday. And so it has a liturgical resonance, right? We know the psalm, but even so, we probably don't know it in its original Hebrew. We probably don't know it by heart. And that is different from the experience that we had of Psalm 23. So all I want to say about that is, imagine what it would be like in a community where everybody knew all of the Psalms by heart, or many of them, maybe not all of them, but where there was like a common corpus, a set of Psalms that everybody just knew Baal Peh, right? Like that they had mastered the orality of them, and how that would make our experience of discussing the Psalms different. My grandmother always used to say that if you memorize poetry, you'll never be alone, because when you're somewhere by yourself, you can just recite poetry. She isn't a particularly musical person, so she didn't say memorize songs, although I think it's sort of the same idea. But she said that about poetry, and then she taught me to memorize. I From a very early age, I memorized several of Robert Frost's poems and a few other poems. And she said, these will serve you in good stead in your life. And I just, to me, like, I think the Psalms are supposed to be that for the Jewish people. They're supposed to be a set of poems that we all know by heart in some sense. And so it was really meaningful to me to discuss Psalm 23, because I really felt like we were able to engage with it differently because of how familiar it was. Yeah, Mishka.
It's really clear that a lot of us have memorized general popular music. And you go to a concert, I would like to say the Grateful Dead or another group, when everybody is singing along with the official performers, it's a whole different experience than you're just listening to it being done. And clearly, when everybody is singing along, the experience is so different, forms a community of all the singers.
No question. Last week, I was not here because I was at the Rabbinic Training Institute, which is kind of like rabbi camp. It's my favorite of the conventions that I go to. It is not really a convention. It's really like an opportunity for spiritual development and professional development and just learning for its own sake for rabbis in the conservative movement. And uh, it's really, really, really beautiful. It's at the like it takes place um at a resort, and we're the only ones at the resort, and it's just this beautiful opportunity, right? So it's like a conference center, a retreat. Anyway, um they asked us what we would like to do with respect to Israel and to the situation in the war in Gaza. And like, would we like to have sessions about it? Would we like to process it? Would we like to talk about it? Or would we like to not talk about it? And of course, everybody responded to that survey in the weeks leading up uh to RTI with sort of complex answers. I think people said it's the most important thing that we talk about it, but I wouldn't want to go to a session about it. Or like we feel very strongly that we don't do nothing, but also please don't make it all about that. We spend all of our time thinking about that, and we want to do other stuff, right? Like it was full of contradictory, like self inconsistent answers to the survey questions. And one thing that we did end up doing, which is why I bring it up, is we did Shira B'Tzibur. We did the Israeli practice of singing Israeli songs together in community. And we spent 2 hours on Wednesday night last week just singing together. Uh, corpus of Israeli music, mostly from the 60s and 70s. And you're absolutely right, Mishka. It was comforting. It created a sense of community. Very, very powerful. Yeah, Natalie.
Excuse me, it was like the elephant in the room that you couldn't avoid the
Right,
discussion
right.
of
No way to avoid talking
right.
about it. No way to avoid talking about it. And we shouldn't avoid it. Uh, and also, it's important to be able to focus on the other things that we need spiritual direction around.
No, but you found a way to address it
Yeah,
and still avoid it.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Anyway, so really, definitely beautiful. And today we're going to look at Psalm 24, and it's going to feel a little different from Psalm 23, and that's okay. So let's jump into our text. Uh, I'm going to read it out loud in the Hebrew, and you'll feel in my reading it that I know this psalm by heart from my uh, from Sunday mornings, and so my reading of it is more fluent than some of the psalms that I don't know as well. LeDavid Mizmor, Ladonai haaretz umloa tevel v'yoshvei ki hu al yamim yisadah ve'al narot yichoneneha. Mi yaleh behar Adonai umi yakum bimkom kodsho neki chapayim uvar levav. Asher lo nasa lashav nafshi v'lo nishba lemirma. Yisa bracha me'et Adonai utzedakah Elohei Yisho. Zed dor dorshav makshe fanecha Yaakov Selah. שאו שערים ראשיכם וינשאו פתחי עולם ויבוא מלך הכבוד. מי זה מלך הכבוד? אדוני עזוז וגיבור, אדוני גיבור מלחמה. שאו שערים ראשיכם ושאו פתחי עולם ויבוא מלך הכבוד. מי הוא זה מלך הכבוד? אדוני צבאות הוא, מלך הכבוד סלה. All right, so we'll read a couple of translations. Let's read the Koran Jerusalem Bible. A Psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's and the
Rabbi, excuse me, we
yes,
need the
yes.
text.
Oh, I hadn't shared it. I thought I had because I was just reading it from my screen.
You mailed it.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. A Psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell in it. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the mountain of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken my name in vain, nor sworn deceitfully. He shall receive a blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is Yaakov, the generation of those who seek him, that seek thy face, Selah. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and lift them up, you everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory, Selah. And let's read Rabbi Richard Levy's translation here on the left. Of David, a song. To God belongs the earth and its fullness, the world and those who dwell within it. For you founded it upon the seas, you establish it upon great rivers. Who shall ascend to the mountain of Adonai? Who shall stand at your sacred site? Clean hands shall, and an honest heart, one who raises up no falsehood to deface my name, who has not sworn an oath that hides deceit. This one shall raise up a blessing from Adonai, and justice from the God of our deliverance. This is the seed of seekers after you. These are the ones who look for your presence. This is Jacob, Selah. Raise up your heads, O regal gates. Let yourselves be raised up, O doors to eternity. Let there enter the ruler of glory. Who is this ruler of glory? Adonai, strong and mighty, Adonai, mighty in battle. So raise up your heads, O regal gates. Raise up the doors to eternity. Let there enter the ruler of glory. Who is this ruler of glory? Adonai of hosts. This is the ruler of glory, Selah. And one last one, the contemporary English version, that they've titled it, Who Can Enter the Lord's Temple? A Psalm by David. The earth and everything on it, including its people, belong to the Lord. The world and its people belong to him. The Lord placed it all on the oceans and rivers. Who may climb the Lord's hill or stand in his holy temple? Only those who do right for the right reasons, and don't worship idols or tell lies under oath. The Lord God who saves them will bless and reward them because they worship and serve the God of Jacob. Open the ancient gates so that the glorious King may come in. Who is this glorious King? He is our Lord, a strong and mighty warrior. Open the ancient gates so that the glorious King may come in. Who is this glorious King? He is our Lord, the all-powerful. So first, what are the emotions? What does this psalm evoke in you? Mishka?
Um, I guess I'm thinking two things. One, generally speaking, it's the last part of anything. It's what you remember. So until you put up this this translation, it was more what I was thinking about from the second part of it, which struck me as really strange because all it said was the that God is in battle, and a sense of, well, who is God battling with? The Lord God saves them and will bless and reward them, meaning those who fought against the idol and the idol worshipers. I was struck too by why is it the God of Jacob? There are many others for whom this God protects and dwells with. And in thinking about dwelling, well, we're having God enter into whatever the space is. And that just kind of, I don't know, kind of left me flat. That's a bunch of different thoughts.
All right, what I heard you say is the ending of this psalm doesn't necessarily match with the beginning of this psalm. And I'm curious to know who God is fighting, like, and um why is God referred to as the God of Jacob as opposed to someone else that could be invoked here? And when you read a psalm and the ending is different from the beginning, the like sense that you're left with is the sense from the end of the psalm, and some sort of sometimes miss the power of the beginning of it. All
Yeah.
right, nice.
The translation.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, Larry.
Well, I see such a difference between the last translation and the earlier the more direct Hebrew translations.
Yeah.
In that this is at the end, it's the lifting up of the gates. In one, it says open, the one you just read, it's opening the gates yourself. And the Hebrew, the implication is speaking directly to the gates, so that unconscious, the barriers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like speaking through the person into what you essentially are. It's saying to the barriers, lift yourselves up so that this person may experience the entrance of the Lord God. Where here it's saying you open up your gates, open up the gates, as opposed to speaking to the gates. And the other is that's the same difference or the same issue on who may climb the Lord's hill. It's sounding like it's an ascension up, as opposed to who may enter into the hill. It's who may go into the mountain, as opposed in the Hebrew sense, as opposed to the last one, which is through a meriting climbing to enter the hill. So one is very deeply spiritual, the Hebrew, as the more direct literal translations, as opposed to this more rational translation at the end.
Yeah, I mean, Mi Ya'aleh Behar Adonai means who will ascend. But I agree with you that there's that the last translation. So it's interesting. The last few weeks, when I've shared that translation, that contemporary English version, Mark, I know, has felt very connected to it. I think Murray has also said, yeah, it's not a Jewish translation, it's a Christian translation. But there's something very nice about hearing the Psalms in our vernacular. In language that feels very like of a piece with our speech. And I think that translation is really good at that. It's very straightforward in sort of modern contemporary English translation vernacular. And your point that it loses some of the spirituality or mystical possibility that is left by that the Hebrew contains, right?
Exactly.
Sharim Rashechem doesn't make sense in contemporary English. Why would you talk to the gates? The gates are not what it really means is that some human should open the gates. That's what it means when you address the gates and say open up, right? It doesn't mean that you expect the gates to open by themselves. And yet there's something very powerful spiritually about imagining that the gates are themselves lifted and lifting themselves in order, God comes forward and the gates themselves scurry out of the way to allow for that kind of experience, right? Oh, gates, lift up your heads, right? Lift up your heads, you gates, right? The gates themselves are responding to God's presence. Powerful. Nice.
Never thought
Gary,
of it.
Sorry,
Gary, you had your hand up.
I did. The thing that struck me was the very simple instructions on how to be worthy, how to be a good person. Clean hands and honest heart. Don't speak falsehoods and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. Who is worthy of connecting to God? A person with clean hands and an honest heart. Yeah, I think that this psalm like describes sort of the righteous person or the worthy person in a very beautiful way, right? Niki chapai muvar levav, right? Especially that sense of pure heart. That's very powerful, evocative language, and I think that sort of speaks to Mishka's point. If you only read the first 5 verses of this psalm, you would end up with a very, very different feeling than when you continue and get all of that stuff about God as King. Mark and then Natalie.
Yeah, it makes it very easy to be in God's presence. All you have to be is a good person. It doesn't say anything about rules or rituals that you have to observe to get there. Just be a decent human being and you've got it, you can get there.
Yeah.
I like that.
Nice. Natalie.
Well, I think it's the person that has to lift their gates that are closing, that are keeping God out. And if you open your heart, meaning gates, or gates meaning heart, then you can let God into you. But first, you have to have clean hands and a pure heart to be able to do that.
So Natalie says, Mishka, this whole dichotomy, which I've now placed onto Mishka, but I'm using sort of as a straw man. But okay, this whole dichotomy between the first half and the second half of the psalm, it actually has a unity. It's not 2 separate ideas. It's one idea, and the way that we have to understand that idea, correct me if this is a fair reinterpretation of what you said, Natalie, is that the gates are not physical gates to the city. They are spiritual gates to your heart. And the kind of person who is able to open up your personal gates to the presence of God is the kind of person described in the first half of the psalm.
That was what I said.
Yeah. So I think that's really beautiful. Right? It connects the 2 halves. Right? Instead of thinking about this, instead of focusing on Lord of Hosts, on the military aspect, on this is a metaphor, right? It's not that God is coming to the gates of some enemy city and the gates themselves are going to open up and God is going to walk in. It's you are the enemy city. You are the thing with the gates. And if you do the hard work of ascending the mountain of Adonai by having a clean hands and an honest heart, by not lying and by not swearing false oaths, if you do the work of being a good person, then you prepare your own gates to open up in the presence of God.
Good.
I love that. I think that really ties the 2 halves of the psalm together. All right, so let's look at some of our liturgical connections to this psalm. So I already said that Psalm 24 is used in full as the psalm for Sunday, and I even brought the Mishnah that describes all of the psalms for the day. So here in the Talmudic references, it says, the following is a list of the daily psalm that the Levites would recite in the temple. This is a very ancient practice, an ancient text. The Levites The Levites would sing on the steps to the temple, and every day they would have a different psalm that they sang. On the first day of the week, they would recite the psalm beginning, a psalm of David, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and all who live in it. Which we know is Psalm 24. The interesting thing is that the Mishnah doesn't give us the number of the psalm. The Mishnah gives us the first line. And I think that that's important in two respects. The first is that the text of the Mishnah might not, in fact, have the same numeration that we have, right? So we have 150 psalms, and they're in a particular order. But we know that there are psalms that didn't make it into the final version of the book of Psalms, and there are some psalms that are completely duplicates of other psalms, right? There are psalms that are printed in our Psalter twice. So it, and we know that some of the psalms maybe were in a different order, and so it's sort of like, okay, they're giving us the first line because that is the best way to describe what this psalm is. And also, that's often how poetry is notated. When you read, say, the Oxford English, the Oxford English Book of Poetry or whatever, you can look in the back and get an index of first lines in case you don't remember the author or the poet or the name or the title of the poem. The first line is often how we remember songs, poetry. So on the second day, they would recite a song, the Psalm of the sons of Korah. Great is the Lord and highly to be praised in the city of God on his sacred mountain. On the third day, they would recite the psalm beginning, a psalm of Asaph. God stands in the divine assembly. Among the judges, he delivers judgment. On the fourth day, they would recite the psalm beginning, O Lord God, to whom vengeance belongs. God, to whom vengeance belongs, shine forth. Psalm 94. On the fifth day, they would recite, for the leader upon the Gittit, a psalm of Asaph. Sing for joy to God our strength, shout to the God of Jacob, which is 81. On the sixth day, they would recite the psalm beginning, the Lord reigns, he is robed in majesty, the Lord is robed, girded with strength, which is 93. And on Shabbat, they would recite the psalm beginning, a song for Shabbat day, which is Psalm chapter 92. So, and this passage, by the way, this passage from Mishnah Tamid is quoted in the daily prayer book, so that every day you read the first line of all the psalms of the day, and it is in the section that our Siddur took out. So it's not in our prayer book, but it is in the traditional morning prayer book, in the section that describes the incense that was offered in the temple every day. So in the part of the service where you would read about the daily offering of incense, you also read about the daily psalm that the Levites recited. Now, the conservative movement, doesn't read about the incense, and so that whole section is taken out, including the list of all the psalms, but we still read the psalm for the day. So I think they sort of assume, oh, well, we don't need to say this Mishnah that describes the psalm because we say the psalm, so we got it. We're doing what the Mishnah says to do, so we don't need to say it. But what you do miss, I think, is that sense that we're doing an ancient practice that has been done for a really, really long time. I mean, well, maybe you don't miss that because it does say at the beginning, this is the psalm that the Levites would sing in the temple. Anyway, so we don't read this Mishnah in our daily service, but many Sidurs do have it, and I mention that because it also quotes our psalm, obviously. But it's not quoting our psalm like to quote our psalm. It's quoting our psalm because it's the psalm for Sunday. Yeah, Mark.
I was just wondering if any of these psalms are ascribed to other poets, and then I see the psalm of Asaph. I assume he was another psalmist.
Yep, and the psalm of the sons of Korah, also other poets. So yeah, so the book of Psalms itself ascribes not all of the psalms to David. And as we were talking about before everybody came in, all of the psalms that are assigned to David were probably not all written by David from a historical perspective. But yes, our book of Psalms does include many others. So I think about 50 of them are actually assigned to someone else. So about a third, maybe a little less than a third. All right, so that's we use this psalm in full as the psalm for Sunday, and we also use it in full during the service for returning the Torah to the ark on festivals that do not fall on Shabbat. So on Shabbat we use right? So that's the one we do on Shabbat. On festivals that are not Shabbat, we do this one. Or right? So that's this psalm. And R. C. Dorr says about this practice, this psalm's dramatic imagery of gates that open for God's symbolic entrance to the temple explains why it accompanies the Torah's return to the ark. Yet the psalm focuses first of all on the state of the worshiper. Purity of action, especially verbal honesty, must characterize those who would enter this holy place and receive its blessing. Like Psalm 29, recited on Shabbat when the Torah is returned, this psalm speaks of God being enthroned. Elsewhere, the psalmist speaks of God being enthroned among the praises of Israel. We might think of our study and worship as having opened the gates and created the heavenly space in which God may dwell. So here, this kind of builds on what Natalie was saying. The liturgical use of this psalm in putting the Torah away is almost like saying the Torah that we just studied from, the last hour of our prayer service where we opened the Torah and read from the scroll and had a sermon and like discussed this text, that is in fact doing the work of preparing ourselves to have verbal honesty, to have purity of action, and preparing ourselves to open our gates, to open the gates to God's coming into our space. Right, we are opening the heavenly space by reading the Torah, by engaging with the Torah. So it changes the context of the psalm from sort of a personal spiritual connection to a communal group effort on studying the Torah, and that studying of the Torah that creates the opening of the gates. It's a nice idea. Yeah, Gary.
Is the idea that the processing of the Torah is an ancient practice, and this might
Yes.
have been part of that practice?
Yes, we don't. I don't know how ancient, but yes, it does seem like this is a very old tradition, and the Psalm 29, when we get to it in a few weeks, Psalm 29, the association of Psalm 29 with the concept of revelation, with the idea of God, of giving God's Torah, that association is extremely old.
There's another way this is sort of like 29, and that is that the repetition of lift up your gates would lend itself very nicely to a call and response. I mean, I can easily imagine a leader reciting the first one and the congregation the second one.
Yeah, a lot of the Psalms have that like clear call and response aspect to it, especially ones that we use liturgically, and especially the ones in Hallel, in the special Psalms of praise for festivals. It's going to be a while until we get to those. They're higher numbers. But when we do, we'll definitely talk a lot about like how these Psalms were intended for liturgy. And those Psalms, it seems clear, were imported into the Psalter, right, into the book of Psalms as a group, as a unit. Like that they had pre-existed and maybe were already associated with festivals, like well before the book of Psalms was finished, and they just get imported in as a unit into the book of Psalms. Good. All right. We've talked before in our class about Perek Shirah, which is this really beautiful idea that every part of the world praises God, and it interweaves all of these verses from Psalms and other places, but mostly Psalms, into and imagines different parts of the universe of the creation singing those words. So our psalm, Psalm 24, is quoted both at the very beginning of Perek Shirah. The very first verse is that the sky says, the Shamayim Omrim, Shamayim sings. But the next line is, and Eretz, like the land sings, the earth sings. And our verse is imagined to be one of the verses that the earth sings. And then our psalm is also quoted in the context of the rooster. So which is the rooster sings a multi-verse long song because the rooster crows several times in the morning. And the person who wrote Perek Shirah imagines that each of the rooster's crows is a different verse. So we'll look first here. Eretz Omeret, the earth sings. The earth and everything in it are Adonai's, the inhabited area and all that dwell within it. So that's the first verse of our psalm. And then verses 6 through 8 are the first call of the rooster in the morning. In its first call, the rooster sings, "Such is the circle of those who turn to you, Jacob, who seek your presence, Selah. O gates, lift up your heads. O up high, you everlasting doors, so the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? God, mighty and valiant, God, valiant in battle." And verses 9 and 10 are the second call of the rooster. In the second call, it sings, "O gates, lift up your heads, lift them up, you everlasting doors, so the King of glory may come in." Who is the King of glory? The God of hosts is truly the King of glory, Selah. So this imagines that every morning when the rooster crows, the rooster is quoting these verses about God's kingship. And I think it's an interesting I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I do think it's interesting to think about, if you were to imagine what the crow was saying, what the rooster's call was, like, what would you imagine? And in what way does this actually, surprise you? And in what way does it not surprise you? So that's my basic question on that. And I think, Perek Shirah is not used in our liturgical service, but there are Jews who say it every single day, the whole thing, like all 6 chapters of Perek Shirah. So, as a daily practice. And it's really beautiful. I mean, it's really beautiful to see the whole world singing God's songs. So, nice. All right, verse 5 is paraphrased and switched to plural in one of the closing paragraphs of our Grace After Meals. So, Bamarom Yelamdu Aleihem V'Aleinu Zechu Chetehei L'Mishmeret Shalom V'Nisa Bracha Mi'ei D'Adonai Yutztaka Melohei Sho V'Nimtzachem V'Sechoto Bein Elohim V'Adam. I have said that, thousands of times in my life, and I don't think it ever occurred to me until I was researching for this class that V'Nisa Bracha Mi'ei D'Adonai Yutztaka Melohei Yishenu was a rewriting of Yisa Bracha Me'et Adonai Yitztakam Elohei Yisho. And the words are almost exactly identical, except that instead of Yisho, it's Yishenu, and instead of Yisa, it's Vinisa. In other words, it turned it into plural. It never occurred to me that it's an allusion to that psalm. So I now have to think, as I do the Birkat Hamazon, as I do the grace after meals, like, what does it mean that I'm quoting that psalm? Like, is it invoking also the idea of Nichi Kapayim Uvar Levav, right? Am I supposed to really feel like saying the grace after meals is part of what it means to be pure of heart, and especially that our speech is supposed to be pure. So I don't know. It's something I'm thinking about. And I brought also a Talmudic text about the blessings that we say on food. So from the Talmud Brachot, which is the section of the Talmud that deals with blessings, page 35a. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, one who derives benefit from this world without a blessing, it is as if he enjoyed objects consecrated to the heavens. So in rabbinic understanding, and also just, I think, in most religious traditions, if you use for profane purposes objects which have been sacralized, that is a big sin, right? Like, you can't just get drunk on sacramental wine. That's like a bad thing, right? Because you're misusing that holy food that was set aside for a sacred purpose. And so a person, so the Shmuel says that if you eat an apple without saying the bracha over the apple, it's like you are enjoying, it's like you're eating sacred food, or it's like you stole from the temple, right? And the proof text, the quote that proves this point, is our psalm. The earth and all it contains is the Lord's, right? Because everything belongs to God. If you take a bite of an apple without saying a correct blessing over it, it's like you're taking from God. So Rabbi Levi explained it a little bit differently. Like, Shmuel is saying it's like you enjoyed consecrated, it's like you wasted the sacramental wine or whatever. But I think Rabbi Levi says it in an easier to understand way. He says that there's a problem. We have two verses from Psalms, and in one verse it says, "Ladonai haaretz umloa," right? God owns everything in the earth, right? The earth and all it contains is God's. That's the verse from our psalm. But it says in Psalm 115, "Hashamayim shamayim ladonai va'aretz natan livnei adam," right? The heavens are the Lord's, but the earth, God has given over to mankind. So how do we understand both of these together, right? It's a contradiction. One psalm says the earth belongs to God. The other psalm says God gave the earth to human beings. So Rabbi Levi says here, this is not a difficult this is not a problem. Here in the verse that says that all the earth is the Lord's, that's before you say a bracha. But once you say a bracha, then God has given that aspect of the earth to you. So when you say a bracha over the apple before you eat it, it's not just that you're showing gratitude in your consumption of food, which we would all think, I think, is worthwhile to do gratitude, but you are actually acquiring it, or you are allowing God to give it to you as a gift. Before you say the bracha, that apple belongs to God. But once you say the bracha, God gives that apple to you as a gift, and then you can eat it without stealing from God. And I think it's a very powerful idea. So when people come to me and they ask, what is one thing that I can do to bring God more into my life? Well, before I started teaching this class of Psalms, now I often talk about the Psalms. But before I started to teach this class on Psalms, I always pointed to brachot, to the blessings before you eat, or to the blessings over, when you hear thunder, there's a specific blessing, and when you see a rainbow, there's a specific blessing, but also the blessings over food. And I shared, like, they are, 6 words, 7 words. They're easy to remember, right? The bar for entry on saying these blessings before you eat is pretty low. And they, in fact, have this incredible sacred power of transferring the ownership, of making sure that you are not stealing from God's world. And to also to create a gratitude practice, and not just to say, I am cultivating an attitude of gratitude, but to have a specific action that does that, and to think of that action as having a real sort of spiritual, legal effect, right? Before you say the bracha, Ladonai haaretz umloa applies from Psalm 24. God owns all of the earth. And after you say the bracha, Ve'aretz natan livnei adam applies. God has given this earth to humankind to live in it, applies from Psalm 115. Anyway, I brought this here because I think it's not an accident that verse 5 is quoted in the blessing in the closing paragraphs of the Grace After Meals, because this psalm is actually already connected in the rabbinic imagination to blessings for meals, right? The blessings that we say on food are deeply connected to this psalm in the rabbi's understanding of it. Yes, Lisa.
Hi, okay. Well, I'm going to take a stab at this, but I kind of feel like all my thoughts are so out of left field today. But with that aside, I'm stuck on the very beginning of that paragraph where it said, Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said. And then he goes on to contradict what Shmuel said. And it makes me think about how if in a court of law today in our society, if you said that, if you use something that another person said to bolster your argument in any way, it would be called hearsay and it would be disregarded. And I just thought it was interesting that that's how he used it. He quoted Shmuel and in order to bolster his argument and dismiss what he had said. So that's
very nice.
That's my 2 cents, if it makes any sense.
No. I mean, I think, right. So the Talmudic tradition says that if you can quote something in somebody else's name, that is greater than if you just say it yourself. Who are you? But if you can quote your teacher saying it, then you're in a chain of transmission. Then you are relying on your teacher who relied on her teacher who relied on his teacher all the way back to Moses. So our Talmudic sages, they really like to have a whole chain of transmission. Sometimes you'll read in the Talmud and it will say, Rav Yossi said that Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said that, whatever, like it will give you a whole list. And sometimes they don't agree on who the list was. So they'll say, and some say so-and-so said it in the name of so-and-so, right? So like there's competing traditions of chain of transmission. But I think you're absolutely right in the sense that you're right to bring it up in the context of this psalm, because I think that it's one of the ways that we understand what it means to be to be having a pure heart and not swearing deceit, right? That we are for what might, nowadays be called plagiarism, as long as you correctly cite your source, right? So then it's not plagiarism. Like, but we're for citing your source. We're for teaching something that somebody else taught. You don't need in Judaism to be an original thinker, right? What you need to be is clean hands and pure heart, meaning to correctly identify the source of your thinking. To say, yeah, and I learned this from my teacher, and that is stronger in the Talmudic canon than if Rabbi Yehuda had just said it himself instead of saying it in the name of Shmuel. Yeah, Dustin.
Yeah, just to lift up, and sorry I'm late, friends. I had an emergency, I had to be on another call. But coming from my Christian tradition, one thing I've learned from Rabbi Rafi is how that citing of person after person after person, like that's all part of your, I guess, canon, right? Part of your corpus of texts, and how that allows for continued interpretation of ancient texts, but still, I guess, sort of inspired, divinely inspired in a way, right?
Yeah, I mean, we get to continue the conversation.
Yeah, which is not as quite as strong in the Christian tradition, and Lord knows I think we could learn a little something. But anyway, yeah, so I've deeply appreciated that perspective.
All right. So the last thing I want to say about how our psalm is used is that verses 7 through 10 are quoted as a whole unit in the Malchuyot section of the Musaf Amidah on Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Hashanah, our service has sort of three big themes in the Musaf service, the special service for Rosh Hashanah. And the three themes are God's kingship, remembering the covenant, and the sound of the shofar. Okay. And we read verses from the Torah, the prophets, and the writings on each of those topics. So we get 3 verses from the Torah on kingship, and then 3 verses from the Psalms on kingship, and then 3 verses from the prophets on kingship, and then 1 final verse from the Torah on kingship. And then we get 3 verses on remembering the covenant, etc., from each of those, from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, from each of the sections of our Tanakh. And the psalm, the verses from Psalms, from Ketuvim, from writings that are quoted for Malchuyot, for the concept of kingship, are our verses here from Psalm 24. Yeah, Natalie.
I don't want us to leave until we congratulate Mishka on having a reception tomorrow night on J Street of her paper cuts.
Oh yes, is a beautiful exhibit there, and you should go and see it. And the reception tomorrow night, definitely wonderful. And if you live here, that's really a terrific opportunity to go and see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Is it handicapped accessible? 121 J Street?
From my experience, not entirely.
Okay, thank you.
There might be some from the back, but I don't know.
Son,
I'll find out.
Well, no, my son is calling them today.
Okay, very good.
We'll check that out.
That's
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the commercial message.
All right, we'll close out here with this comment from Rabbi Richard Levy. One could imagine standing at an impressive physical sight, the Grand Canyon, say, or a forest of evergreens soaring to the sky, or the waves roaring on the ocean shore. and inviting these natural structures to raise up their heads to let God enter, letting us see beyond the natural majesties of trees or rocks or seas, the creative presence of the God who created them. In such a regal setting, one could imagine feeling unclean, or at least greatly humbled, and asking, how can I feel worthy to stand before the God who brought such creations into being? The answer in this psalm is, act justly, raise up no falsehoods, swear no oaths that hide deceit. In other words, be as upright in our actions as the natural gates of God are in their awe-filled grandeur.
Hmm.
Any final closing thoughts?
I think it's wonderful that some people go out into nature to pray, because that's really bringing out what the psalm is saying.
Yeah, at least according to Rabbi Richard Levy. That is not the only way to understand the psalm, but I do agree. I think it's beautiful. Mishka, when we first read the psalm, you were feeling really ambivalent about it.
Mhm.
Has the conversation saved it for you?
It's been enlightening and makes me feel better about it. It seems like the two halves are more connected than I'd seen them before.
Nice.
How many Psalms are there, Rabbi?
150 contained in our book of Psalms. The 150. Yeah, there may be more than that that were written. But in the book of Psalms that we have, there are 150 Psalms. Gary.
Can you say more specifically where and when Mishka's exhibition is?
Oh, sure. Mishka, go ahead.
It's at the New York Folklore Society's store, for want of a better word, on J Street. If you know where the Whistling Kettle is, it's right across from there, right? And if you know where the Open Doors, it's just a little bit further down. I can't give you the address. I never knew it.
121 J Street.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I just want to say it's not just my work. I'm in contrast. My work is in contrast to a woman who does beautiful, beautiful Chinese paper cutting. And to the best extent, we've grouped them such that those who are related in theme are together. But her
And when
stuff
is it?
is just mind-blowing.
How
When is
long, how long will it be there?
Till March 5th.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Got a
and the
big
hours,
reception.
I'm sorry, it's 129 J Street.
okay, but
when
it's
does it
pretty
start?
easy to find. If you're, it's pretty easy to find. I
And it
have to,
starts tomorrow?
I'm sorry?
Starts tomorrow?
It started
No,
already. It's been up
started
for about a
already.
month, but a few weeks. But the big reception is tomorrow.
Right, from
And
5.
both artists will be there, so an opportunity to meet Mishka and the Chinese artist whose work is also really stunning.
Right, it is stunning. That's the right word.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so thank you everybody for this wonderful discussion of Psalm 24. I will endeavor very much to get you the source sheet for Psalm 25 sooner than 20 minutes before the class. I was out of town last week, and so I just finished it up right before class. But hopefully we'll get to next week's earlier in the week. And I look forward to learning with you next week. Thank you,
Thank you, Rabbi.
everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank-
Rabbi.
Good day, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Listen to